Do we have a particular hashtag we want to use? I can start one.
I'd say just do hashtag VSTE. If we could get that out there, that'd be great.
Okay.
Keep it simple for people.
Having fun, Keith?
You know it. Every chance I get.
This is part of the new board member hazing that happened.
Yeah, right.
If two ed tech nerds have a conversation on Google Hangout and there's no one there to hear it, does it actually make a difference? Yes, because we can watch it again and again and again later.
Right. We're all back channeling over here. I've got my Windows 8 machine. I've got my Mac.
That's the way to do it, man.
Got my two phones here.
I love it.
My desk phone. I'm all ready to roll.
I have to be a little careful that I don't kill my rural bandwidth here. So,
yeah.
But I could tweet on my phone.
I think I was killing my inner city. Bandwidth.
And Keith, when it says one viewer at the top, what does that mean? Is somebody watching from the page, or is that the YouTube? Do you know?
Well, from the page, I believe. From
okay.
From the YouTube account. Presumably, it's linked over.
Yeah, okay.
If you have it open.
Right. Yeah, it is. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I did, and I thought maybe I was the one person, so I closed it. Plus, then I end up hearing multiple voices, and I already do that enough in my life without causing it to happen.
I have the same.
All right. Yeah, right. So let's go ahead and get started here, folks. Welcome to the VSTE Conversation. I'm Karen Richardson. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Society for Technology and Education, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our afternoon conversation about learning. Before I introduce and turn it over to our guest speakers, I would like to remind folks of two upcoming events this week. The first is the deadline Wednesday, October 23rd for all the VSTE awards: Outstanding Teacher, Outstanding Leader, and Innovative Educator of the Year. We'll take those nominations, and folks who win are invited to the annual conference, which is December 8th, 9th, and 10th in Roanoke. Also on Wednesday at 8 p.m. we will be hosting an Integrating Math Technology in the Math Classroom webinar. We're co-hosting that with VSTE, and we'll be featuring 4 math specialists from across the state talking about technology and mathematics. Information about all the events can be found at www.viste.org. So, welcome this afternoon. I'm pleased to introduce 2 VSTE board members who will be kicking off this conversation, talking about how we make learning the primary focus of what we do, I think not just in ed tech, but throughout the school day. Becky Fisher is from Albemarle County, and Keith Reeves is from Arlington. So, welcome Becky and Keith, and I'm going to go ahead and mute my microphone and let you all get started to kick off this conversation.
Great. Can you hear me okay, Keith?
Sounds good over here.
All right, great. I can hear you too. So, you know, I think when I think about the language that we use in schools, a lot of times it's all about teaching this, teaching that. When we ask teachers questions like, what do you teach? We very rarely get the response, kids. We normally get the response of a grade level or a subject area. I teach chemistry, or I teach 3rd grade. So I'm wondering what would it take, what kind of culture, what kind of work would it take for us, what kind of structures in schools would it take for us to answer the question with, I teach kids, somehow or the other. I don't know what your reaction is to that.
I feel exactly the same way. It baffles me how often we lose focus, and I think that that this trend is more and more prevalent. The quote-unquote higher up you get in terms of the K-12 spectrum. I've taught K through 12 at this point, and I notice it a lot more at the secondary level than I did at elementary school. People will become increasingly content-focused. I think there's also a certain perception amongst even practitioners within our field that when you get to the high school level, you know, you really get to dig in and you get to do content, and it's the quote-unquote higher level stuff. Whereas I think that an elementary school teacher has a far more robust set of responsibilities when it comes to the whole child because of their vulnerability. And I wonder if there's not a certain social component to that, that as you get further away from the quote-unquote fundamentals of kids, when we think kids, you know, little kids, that you start to disengage from that and stop looking at children as children. We start to treat 18-year-olds like young adults rather than keeping focused on these are kids that need to be taught. You know, these are kids that we need to facilitate with learning. And the word kid should always come at the beginning of that thought. I'm not sure what it would take in terms of a cultural shift, but I have a feeling that it's going to be driven, at least in part, by policy, don't you? Isn't there something to be said that it kind of has to be a led initiative?
I think some of it does have to do with policy. I mean, we do, there's not that many multi-age groupings in my district, at least, and we probably are, you know, we've got some schools that do K1s and that sort of thing, but then when the kids reach about 8 years old, and there's an issue, actually, kids start school based on their age. It's all calendar based. So we have kids when they're about 8, they're in 3rd grade, and the state testing program happens. And at that point, in subject areas like reading and math, the kids have to take a test every year. So you can't take your kid in 3rd grade that is ready to take off in math and really take that risk with them unless you're willing to take a hit on the kid perhaps not passing the SOL test, or you want to say, yeah, you can spend your year in 5th grade math, but you're going to take the 3rd grade test because we're not going to lose your score. So we really, the state has these structures in place that make it really difficult to look at the kids that don't fit that age norm mold in either direction, the kids that are accelerated academically or the kids that need extra time. Everybody takes the SOL test on the same day, and even some of the testing accommodations are going away, or were not necessarily applicable to kids that just needed more time to learn something. So I think there are some structures in place that make it harder to do that. And I think that really begs the question to me about what is it that we're going for, and that's like an age-old school improvement question of effective at what.
Mm-hmm.
So this day and age, effective at what? We've never really been able to dig our teeth into answering that with state tests, passing state tests. And I think we're even less so able to dig our teeth into answering that when we realize the state tests fall so short of what kids in this century have to know, understand, and be able to do.
And that last thing is absolutely critical. I think you just nailed it. There are 3 points that I think you killed it. That's exactly right. And it goes to what Ken Robinson said about the fact that the system cannot be reformed at this point, but we actually need a revolution. We can do the idealism part of this first. I know everyone's shocked. Calendar-based instruction that is based on an antiquated agrarian system that has nothing to do with 21st century learning models. Age-based promotion, which for the record is naturally anti-differentiation. The notion that we would tie advancement based on skill mastery to something that has nothing to do with skill mastery, that is utterly relative and individualized, I think that's critical. And the third one is the biggest one. I think you're exactly right. It's test scores. We have created a system that is very good at reducing human potential to a meaningless integer and reporting that integer to parents and to institutions as if that integer matters. And we know, the research says, every meaningful educator understands that that is a nonsensical indicator. It doesn't reflect skill mastery. It doesn't reflect what students can do. And the fact that that's the ultimate objective, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that was the last thing that you said. The authentic application of skill, what can the child do, skills-based assessment, performance-based assessment, is wholly absent from the way that we approach, the way that we organize schools in terms of our policy and our practice. Which begs exactly, as you said, the question, what is it that we do with that? Because I think we attract naturally into the educational technology community people who are revolution-minded, who are interested in really changing the paradigm, moving to a new way of teaching, moving to a new way of organizing how we help kids learn. But certainly people, I don't know how you feel personally where you are, I know that I can say this comfortably if my principal walks through the door. There are a lot of things in place that prevent me from doing a lot of the things that I would like to do otherwise. Which makes it very challenging to do the thing that we're talking about today, to keep kids at the center of this thing.
Yeah, and I think we do have a lot of barriers in place at the state and at the federal level. I think the localities are really, in many cases, they're pushing back, and VSTE has supported the VAST blueprint. Many of the school boards are now writing resolutions asking for a break from state testing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sort of thing is really where we're going with saying what we're doing, we're not doing in the best interest of kids. And we've got to do something different. It's not working in many measures. think that changing cut scores is resulting in better learning for kids. That's not necessarily the case. So how do we really look at everything that we do and ask the question, how does this help kids learn what they need to know and be able to apply it in ways that none of us can imagine right now? And I think that's really what we have to go after. And what we get hit with in our business a lot are the folks that are looking for that quick win and for traditional instruction to be more effective. And I'm not interested in buying iPads so that you can serve up faster flashcards.
Amen to that.
And how do we look at what it is that kids really do need to be going after in their use of contemporary technologies, and make sure we have time, space, and opportunity to support kids and teachers going after those things.
It's funny you mention that. I had a conversation on Facebook just recently with a colleague of mine about cursive writing, and the teacher was making the case, I'm going to start interjecting penmanship back into my high school English language arts curriculum and teach these kids how to write in cursive correctly. And of course, my initial reaction was I was horrified by that idea. So I engaged her in a conversation. What is it that you want kids to be able to do? Well, kids don't have the grammar that I'd like them to have, and they don't seem to appreciate the need for proper language, and they can't sign their names in a legible fashion. I don't write in cursive. I can sign my name. Every legal document I've ever signed, I don't use cursive. That's not a skill that I have, but that doesn't preclude me from utilizing proper grammar. What is your objective for your students and their learning? Well, I want to improve their grammar. Okay, cursive writing is the vehicle by which you do that? Well, I don't know. I mean, I've got these iPads and I found this, cursive writing program. That's not an answer to the problem, which is the improvement of grammar. There's such a disconnect for so many of our practitioners between what they want their kids to be able to do and how they're applying that technology. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, and I think we have to go back to what it is that we're going after. When you talk about performance assessments earlier, what is it? How do we potentially create these projects or these tasks that don't really allow us to say this kid knows this information and can put it together in these ways to convey meaning. A lot of times we go after that presentation flair, and we're kind of seduced into that. So really it goes all across the board. I don't care if you've done a Prezi with beautiful transitions if you didn't help me understand something I didn't understand beforehand.
Absolutely.
So it's really, it gets very complicated to look at what is it that we expect the kids to know, understand, and to do, and what are we going to accept as evidence that they know those things, they understand those things, and they can do those things, when it's those things that matter. And
Absolutely.
And if we look at the Virginia Standards of Learning, and we see in there some of the what I call the trivial pursuit standards versus the connected and connecting standards.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're still testing kids on things that anybody with two opposable thumbs and a smart device can look up in 30 seconds or less. Where do we draw that line in the sand? And I know Edie Hirsch drew it one place. The Virginia Standards of Learning committees have drawn it another place. Common Core folks drew it another place, saying this is the body of knowledge everybody should have at their disposal. But holy gosh,
yeah,
that body of knowledge in and of itself is so so huge that we don't allow the time for the process skills and the connecting work to happen. And I think that's where we really get into being able to talk about teaching kids. You know, I may, if I have that opportunity, I may not get to your grammar in English class. I may get to your grammar by working on math syntax and order of operations in math and helping you understand that, because that may be an area of interest for you. But when we pigeonhole kids all day long so that we can have the most effective, quote-unquote, instruction, we oftentimes lose opportunities to meet the individual kid.
Agreed. And effective as measured by indicators that we know are ineffective measures of effectiveness. I think that corporate model of instruction, the notion that we're going to standardize children, I think that it helps us to use that language as frequently as possible. I think that you mentioned language when we started this off. I really want to avoid phrases like the business of education. It makes my skin crawl. When we talk about delivering education as if it's a commodity, standardizing children is a bad idea. Just any example of any society in the world, if everyone does and is the same thing, the society will collapse. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure that out. The notion that we would standardize what every child has to know and has to do on the comprehensive level that we've done makes very little sense to me. I understand the notion of minimum competency, and I think very often people think that people who say the things that I say are being an apologist for minimum competency standards. Quite to the contrary, I think that we can all accept there are basic skills, take content knowledge out of it for a second, the skills that students have to have when they leave certain levels to be prepared for things that we expect from our society. I understand that. But you're exactly right, that not every child is going to know exactly the same thing and do it in exactly the same way. Many of the content standards that we have in terms of background knowledge, to me, are so ridiculously irrelevant, and you're exactly right about saying two opposable thumbs. If a child knows what December 7th, 1941 is, good for him. Now he's Ken Jeffries and can go on Jeopardy, but that fact means diddly squad. If you don't understand the ramifications of, from a global social perspective, what led up to World War II, how we got into it, what occurred during that, and what came out of that in terms of its application to how the world works. It doesn't make any sense to simply ask a child to be able to regurgitate a fact, as you said, that anybody can get easy access to. And the apocalyptic notion of information passing as if we still have a need for word-of-mouth storytelling to preserve the body of knowledge, that's a quaint idea. But we're not going to, short of a massive thermonuclear global apocalypse, in which case this conversation really becomes a lot less important than food and water, short of something like that, we're not going to see that knowledge evaporate. The application of that knowledge in a meaningful skill, that's obviously the thing that we want to focus on. But we can't do that because of the way that the standards are worked both at the state and the federal level. Until we start engaging legislators and decision makers and policymakers, I will not say policy experts, because very often the policymakers are not experts in the field that they represent. A school board member is often not an expert in curriculum design. They rely upon us to guide them. I think that we need to start advocating very strongly for the need to change our approach in the standards away from let's make sure that we throw everything at the wall and try to get as much to stick as possible, to the notion of really honing in on what is it skills-wise that we want everyone to do, and then allow greater latitude for children to explore their interests, precisely as you said.
I think that's critical. I think it's also critical when you look at the nature of the technologies that we are putting out there and what we're expecting folks to do with those technologies. You look at something like the pocket calculator. We could go one-to-one with pocket calculators in my school division for less than $15,000. And we could even get solar-powered ones so that so the kid could theoretically have it forever, and it would do the 4 functions, and then it would be incumbent upon the kid to not remember those multiplication tables and those multiplication facts, but to know how to use the tool and to develop some facility with those things that the kid would be calculating repeatedly, so that he or she would not always have to pull out the calculator to do simple math, but they would know how to do the hard math. So that's kind of the pocket calculation question. Well, the pocket calculation question really hasn't changed what we do to teach math. We still do a lot of mad minute kinds of things. We still have kids work on their quote-unquote basic facts. How do we do that? Do we do it in a way that has kids building deeper understanding of the way numbers work together? Or do we have kids doing it so that they glance up and they catch the number out of the sky and they write the answer down? And I think the same sort of thing applies to this notion of pocket information. And there's some facility in retrieving the information and being able to evaluate the quality of the source that you're retrieving it from. But most of the heart and gold of this is what you do with that information. And I think we really do have to start getting to that question of why are we doing something? Why is something so important that I'm going to take these 29-year-olds an hour, I'm going to take an hour out of their lifetime, an hour out of my school year, out of our school year together, out of our time together, and we're going to do this thing because it's so important. Yep. And then how do we come to a real community consensus on what those things are? It used to be that we talked about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and now I want to add remembering to that. So we've got these 4 R's that are not going to carry us. It's what we test, right? But those are not that's not what's going to carry us through, and really ensure that our kids are not just able to remember the facts for the performance, but that they actually do understand how those facts go together. So what is it about that date, 1941, that might help us better understand what's going on right now?
I think my favorite example of pocket information that I use with my ELA teachers all the time is the notion of MLA citation. We drilled when I was in middle school and early high school. You got it drilled into your head. You have to memorize this. You have to memorize this on how to properly cite sources. That to me is irrelevant. I mean, the memorization of MLA format, APA format, it's irrelevant. I'm writing a book on education revolution. I don't know off the top of my head how to cite many things. I mean, some of the things I do because of practice, but that's a skill that I gleaned. It's not something that I need pounded into my head. What I want children to know, and I often ask ELA teachers, why is it that you do that? Well, all kids need to know how to cite. Okay, you can look it up. Well, yeah, but what if they don't have I'm sorry, really? What if they don't have a computer in front of them while they're writing? Are you nuts? That's not how the world works anymore. And it's not on the test, so why are you doing that? Well, it's important that kids don't plagiarize. Aha, that's a much more relevant skill. I want kids to know the nature of intellectual property, the reasons that it's important to give credit, especially in a 21st century society in which copy-pasting is simple. Oh, I don't want my kids to copy-paste. Oh, hang on. Yes, you do. Copy-pasting is an essential 21st century computing skill. Plagiarism is not the same as copy-pasting. Oh, I never really thought of it that way. Right. Well, start. That separating those two things, that knowledge that we all have immediate access to, and the way in which you apply that knowledge, which you can't look up on Wikipedia, that's a critical difference.
I agree, and I think a lot of times we go for the 5-paragraph essay that was done in Google Docs, or the the page of citations that include print and web resources and 5 of each and whatever, and it's in the right format, and we don't really get to the meat of what we're going for with that, where we want kids to be able to be critical consumers of information and producers of new knowledge, and to be facile in sharing that new knowledge with others, so that others can gain from their insight. So when do we have the time to do that? And I think really, that's we really do have to look at how we can buy back some of the time working with kids, so that we are able to hit some of those deeper themes and not just do the cursory 172 objectives that we have to cover this year.
That's a great point. I'm going to remember that the next time I hear a colleague of mine, because I'm always trying to get in and offer my services. The next time I hear a colleague complain about how little time we have, I'm going to remember that. What is it that you can streamline to buy back some of that time? I really like that phrase. I think that's something we would all do well as curricular designers to keep in mind.
And I refer to it a lot as double dipping also, that you really do have to look at some of these interdisciplinary unit opportunities that we may have, and how do we pool some of our time? So we have, talk to what level are you in, Keith? Are you elementary or middle
I'm in
school?
secondary, 9-12.
9 through 12.
Mm-hmm.
So listen to the kids at lunch talk about the paper they had to write for this teacher, the thing they had to do for that teacher.
Yeah.
And it's like, really? You guys, you could have been doing all of this as one integrated project. I don't care if you're in Algebra 2 and chemistry. There's ample opportunity there. I don't care if you're in, 11th grade American literature and U.S. Virginia history. Good gosh. What an opportunity there. We're covering the same time periods, and how can we pull those pieces together so that I'm not doing my research project for history and writing my paper for English? I'm doing all of that together, and I'm doing it in a way that doesn't make me think third period is English, and when I think about words, and sixth period is
right.
history, and when I think about times.
Absolutely.
So I really think, and I think too, in that situation, teachers absolutely working together on those interdisciplinary teams would absolutely be more inclined to talk about teaching kids and talk about learning.
Absolutely.
Than I teach history.
Mm-hmm. At Yorktown, the English and the social studies classes are blocked. They're taught in classrooms with flexible partitions between the two, and oftentimes they're co-instructed. It's a model that we have at Yorktown. But it's something we don't... Is
this all grade levels?
It is, 9 through 12.
9 through 12?
Mm-hmm. Mostly at the earlier levels.
Okay. Because we did 11th grade, what we called American Studies,
mm-hmm.
about 10 years ago, and maybe a little bit longer than that. And some of our schools, we've got 3 comprehensive high schools. One of our comprehensive high schools has continued to schedule around that and to make sure those classes have a symbiotic block of time.
Right.
So it's kind of an interesting piece.
And I think it's an opportunity we need to take better advantage of which we need to take better advantage. Sorry, just got done talking about ELA and grammar. I think that it's important for us to use situations like that to talk about fused and overlapping and in common assessments, not just in common from one classroom to another, but to try to get synergy between those two organizations, the English teachers and the social studies teachers, and get them to realize that there is so much that they have in common in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. And it lends itself naturally towards my desire, and I think many other educational technologists' desire, to see more integrated, comprehensive, performance-based, skills-oriented assessments where you're actually doing the thing As a enthusiast for gaming and simulation, I think there's a lot of simulation opportunity when it comes to recreating things that we would do that would accomplish both objectives. And English and social studies are just natural allies, I think. To demonstrate comprehension of a thing, you do the writing about the thing. Well, fuse those two together, utilizing the extant technology, half of the amount of time in the assessment, and then have the teachers split it up and read it from their two relative perspectives. You can get more assessment at a better level accomplished with less time. But the thing that drove it wasn't, we need to be more efficient. It's not the business side of it, that drives it. It's the fact that it's a better quality assessment and allows us to inform our children of their deficits and their strengths in a more effective way. I think that's one of the reasons it's so essential to keep that pedagogical mindset whenever you're talking about the review and the revision of assessment. It has to be driven by what we're talking about, not by the secondary effect. There are pleasant secondary effects in terms of efficiency and in management, but management should never trump learning. And I think that it does far too often because it's easier for managerial figures to talk about. At least I think so.
Well, I think the real learning is hard to measure. It's messy.
Amen.
And I think that's part of what's going on with the making decisions around our state testing program that are cheap and and theoretically accurate in terms of at least our ability to report the number of kids that got a multiple choice test or test question wrong is theoretically a lot higher than our ability to score consistently complex solutions to complex problems. So I think that when you look at the difference in what goes into scoring the writing test, the writing prompt versus the multiple choice part of the writing test, it's substantially different.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that I think we have to look at is the fact that those tests are but a measure of what a kid can or can't do on a single given day. And
not even a particularly effective measure at that.
And how do we create an environment where we're looking more for a body of evidence over time, and what role can technology play in that?
Exactly.
And then that kind of gets into the question, I really struggle with the fact that, in many cases, our kids at some level don't care whether or not we use, Google Drive portfolio strategy, or they, where we're asking them to put their stuff. They care less about the technology at some level. Although what we do find is there is an efficiency to be picked up. If every teacher has the same, way that when you walk into the class, you grab a do now using the same methodology, about your third time of doing that, you're kind of done. You know where to go get your do nows. Whereas if every day is a new adventure, and you're constantly waiting for a new instruction set, you don't get into that routine, you don't get the automaticity. So should we try to develop at the school level, here is our technology supported strategy for kids accessing a do now. Here's our technology supported strategy for kids submitting an artifact to a portfolio they're going to come back to. So that's really starts to get into the weeds with some of the how do we accomplish all of this stuff.
So I promised I was going to mute my microphone, but I'm just going to jump in here real quick, only because this gets back to my dissertation research, and anytime I can talk about that, it makes that money worth it.
So Dr. Karen, let us have
Becky,
Go for it.
Yes. So what I did I looked at teacher planning, and what you said, Becky, gets at the heart of how teachers do things in their classroom. By the end of September, some 80% of what they do is routinized, and it's exactly that kind of stuff. Where do you hand in your journal? Where do I put the homework? How do I do the do now? Those kinds of things. And I think that's a place where technology people can help teachers by making some of those decisions for them. And particularly if you can make it across the board, then it really helps the kids. So if all the 5th grade teachers do that same thing the same way, it helps the 5th grade teachers, but it helps the 5th grade kids too. But I think definitely that's one of the things we can do to help the teachers get over some of those hurdles is here's a great way to do this and give them the background for how, because once they've got the devices, they've got access, now how do I make it part of the routine that I do? And if you can help them get that in place, you're going a long way towards helping them make effective use of some of those productivity tools for streamlining what's going on in their classroom.
Right. I have a question, a follow-up question for you, Karen, now that you've unmuted your mic. The follow-up question is, did you do any analysis of the commonalities or the common factors in the routines across a team of teachers?
I didn't, and it'd be a great thing to do. So I use TPAC as my model, and what I was looking for was the kind of knowledge that they applied. And so what I did discover was that the teachers of the 12 teachers I looked at, the ones who were using it on a pretty routine basis had developed some. So for instance, I had one teacher who the very first time I observed her was the first time she had used the cart. So she had no routines at all.
Right.
And by the end of the day, she was exhausted, and she was immediately saying, I got to figure out a way to hand them out, to collect them, to make this all work better, because I can't do everything. So maybe 5th graders could be trusted, that kind of thing. So what we found was the ones who had used the carts before did have a system in place. Now, my teachers were all at different places, so they couldn't talk to each other necessarily, but they're doing it, but they could be helped by having somebody. That math teacher would have really been helped if the ITRT would have said to her ahead of time, here's what you might think about before you roll that cart in your classroom.
Yep, and I think it's been interesting. We've kind of seen this played out. We've got 4 one-to-one pilots this year across 4 of our secondary schools, and I would say one of those schools really invested a tremendous amount of time in figuring out the mundane, the non-sexy stuff around what are kids going to do, where, every day with this stuff. And every kid's got a Lenovo ThinkPad. What is it that we expect them to do every day? And they, the whole routinizing, I think is what you called it, developing these routines, absolutely. They have that down pat, whereas we haven't seen that necessarily in the other schools, but we're seeing different kinds of uses. So looking at that, the different types of uses, and whether or not we are pushing for the routines that may be replacing paper routines. So we're asking you to do the same thing you did, but instead of doing it on paper, we're asking you to do it on this computer. And to what extent will that actually make the learning experience better? It may be harder to lose, and it may be easier to grade, but is it better for the learner in the end? And or did we just do what Keith and I were talking about earlier, and in a typical middle school kid's day, did we just buy back 30 minutes of time? Because where to get your do nows is no longer a point of discussion.
Does that
make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
If we're going to standardize something, those are things that we can standardize, and not on the basis of management, but on the basis of learning and design. Standardizing resource provisioning doesn't dictate utilization methodology. I mean, so long as that standardization is inclusive of differentiation, then our students of varied thinking modalities can achieve more effectively and more efficiently because those navigation barriers are removed. A kid can get what the kid needs to learn because she knows where to get that thing she needs. Those are great things to standardize. The notion to standardize and dictate, this is how you will utilize this resource at this moment and this time, that's very 19th century approach. That's a very antiquated way of not only viewing teaching, but more importantly, of viewing children and their learning. It is an outdated way of viewing kids and their learning.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. And I often comment, about being in classrooms. If you're in a classroom in October, in an elementary classroom in October, and a kid says, "Where are the scissors?" You just know that's 30 seconds of wasted time right there. And part of what we are working towards is taking care of that 30 seconds by building that upfront time. Bill Glasser used to say you can take 5 seconds every day, or you can take 5 minutes on the days when something blows up. So where do you get your greatest return on the time? So I think figuring out what we can have a routine for, and if there's more than one teacher interacting with that group of kids over the course of a school day, where can we find some similarities in our routines? Where can we negotiate some of these routines so that we're not asking the kids to constantly code switch? And maybe we can learn a little bit from each other and find some points of intersection if we take the time to say, so how do kids spend the first 15 minutes in your class every day?
And this is really old school, but years ago when I was still in the classroom, I taught in a computer lab. It really was sort of completely differentiated. Kids had things they worked on that they knew, we come in, this is what we do, here's where we go to start. And so I was having a meeting with the superintendent right outside my lab, and we sat at the table and we were talking, and the classes changed, and so kids came out of the lab, kids went into the lab, and 5 minutes into it, he suddenly realized what had happened, and he said to me, "Oh, do you need to go in there and get your kids started?" And I looked in the door and I said, "Well, no, because it looks like they got started." And it's because they knew where the home page was and they knew what to do. But that's a classroom management technique that a lot of times we don't talk to teachers about.
Yep.
And it isn't sexy, but it's really important to them, and particularly for teachers who are moving more towards a problem-based or project-based or individualized mastery kinds of things. Those kinds of management techniques become essential to them because that's what they're going to have to do. A check-in at the beginning of class or a check-in after, whatever it is. Those are sometimes the places we don't help them, and then they struggle because it all seems like chaos and disaster because nobody knew what to do and everybody was someplace and that kind of thing.
I think some of our allies that we need to take advantage of in a situation like this are our arts educators, and I say this having been one myself. Teaching middle school band without precisely the phenomenon you're describing will result in no band.
Right.
Children have to have those routines in place to be able to get their resources and begin their learning, whatever that learning may be for those particular kids. And they're not the same section to section, kid to kid, player to player, day to day. But without those structures of instructional classroom management, you do run into those problems.
Right.
I wanted to make sure that I clarify. When I talk about management as disdainfully as I do, I'm really talking about the business attitude rather than classroom management, which is critical to the good application of pedagogy and ed tech. I think we can take advantage of the arts educators we have in our buildings because as a music teacher, I've been doing performance-based assessment for 150 years in my field. Like, that's what we do. You can't, how do you play the B flat major scale? You play the B flat major scale. That's what you do. You cannot bubble sheet the performance of the B flat major scale. We have a lot to learn from the arts education community in terms of how to take fullest advantage of skills in classroom management for project and performance-based learning.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we really do need to take a good hard look at what it is that we do every day that we call a school day. How is that day organized and orchestrated what is it that we expect kids to do and to not do, and what is it that the kids are working on. And if you go through the day in the life of a high school kid, is that a day you'd like to spend? And how do we make sure that the kids, we're meeting them where they are and pushing them forward in a direction that is going to help them pick up some traction in this crazy world that we have going on these days. I think that is a piece that we really do have to recognize. We don't always get to live in our comfort zones, nor do we always live in our discomfort zones. And part of what we're trying to do in working the way we work is leverage the intelligence of each other. And yet we don't give kids that opportunity to develop those skills necessarily, and to really build off of one another. And I think that's a piece that we have to look at. So when we think about effective at what, I would think that collaborative work is a critical piece, and that's something that's absolutely not recognized by our state testing program, and not recognized by a lot of the structures that we may have in place in our schools.
So practically speaking, Becky, let me put a question to you as I look at, we've got some odd 15 minutes left. Speaking to the ITRTs that are inevitably going to be a part of this conversation, that are either watching now or will watch later, what is it that we as educational technologists here in Virginia do for our teachers on the classroom level in places where the policy and practice at those upper echelons is not conducive to the sort of progressive thought and almost insurgent policy craft that we've described here as our ideal? What do we as ed tech leaders say to our ITRT colleagues? These are the things that you can work on that will help advance us towards keeping students squarely in the bullseye.
Well, Keith, I think that's a great question. I think we've got to model that, taking the folks back to the why. I mean, we get hit with shopping lists all the time. I need 5 iPads. Well, why? Or I need, some Android devices. Well, why? And really helping folks to see the value in what they already have and the value added in what they're asking for. And it's got to be value added for the kids. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, I mean, so a teacher asks the question about, or asks for more stuff, I start asking questions about whether or not the kids are using their personal phones, or bringing in their personal technologies. And we, a lot of times I get the response that I didn't know they could. Mm-hmm. And so, it's an opportunity to then educate about our board policies and encourage them to have the conversation with their school administrator about how to proceed. So I think that sort of piece, it's a combination of enabling folks to really leverage the policies that we do control. The DOE does not tell us that kids can or can't bring their own devices to schools. We make that decision. Mm-hmm. And that's a local decision made at potentially the school board policy level, or implemented at the school level. So I've always tried to empower teachers with information. You want to know why this website is blocked and this one isn't? I'll tell you why. Here's how those decisions are made. And always trying to push folks to be part of that decision-making process and to understand how the decisions are made. So I think taking folks back to what is it that we want to accomplish, what resources do we currently have, and what needs do we have, recognizing that some of those needs may very well be absolute real needs and some are perceived needs. But still, we have to negotiate through all of that.
Agreed. It's a tough ball of wax.
Yep.
I often find myself going back to, and I think that's one of the reasons that I've been so driven to come to, not to shamelessly plug us, but organizations like VSTE, but to have those larger conversations, because things keep going in that direction. You dig down the rabbit hole. I was having a conversation today that started with, hey, as long as you're here, the tech isn't in the building at the moment. Can you look at this smart board? It's not, poking right. I can move the cursor here, but it doesn't work on the screen. Sure, no problem. I just flipped one thing and that was it. That qualified as level 1 troubleshooting. But then the question was, so what are you doing up here? And that's, oh, well, here's what I'm doing, and here's how I'm doing it, which led to a conversation about assessment, which led to a conversation about the school policy on assessment, which led to the division conversation, which led to a conversation about, which led to a conversation. And before you know it, you're having a fairly meaningful conversation with a teacher about some of the more significant roots that led to the poison tree. I think that you're exactly right, that engaging as many individuals as we can with as much information to empower them to know what it is that's going on, how things are done, why they're being done that way, is only going to benefit us in the long run. Because certainly I think one of the barriers to us focusing on asking why for kids is not asking a whole lot of why for some of our adult colleagues. There's some very serious misperceptions about what teaching is, about what learning is, about what schools should be at levels very high up the food chain. And I think that our engagement in that regard is going to be critical if we're going to get any traction, real traction, towards what we have described as our ideal.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've got to look at really what the state defines as being a quality public education in Virginia, and we've got to inform that, and then regardless of how that question is answered at the state level, really build that local community buy-in.
I agree.
Well, and I'll just jump in here since I'm not in the classroom on a daily basis. I work with some people, but they're usually grant winners or, kind of more higher end schools and more higher end educators like you two. I'm helping out with a local tutoring / computer program here in my little town, and they're really challenged kids, and they come on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and part of what we do is help them get their homework done. Well, I think they're first graders, and they showed up with these packets of worksheets, and I guess I just am out of the worksheet world, but they were kind of fill in the blank vocabulary things, and I'll be honest, I had trouble completing one of them. They were random sentences. They were teaching them the difference between, fit and fits and hit and hits, but they were just these sentences that made no sense, and you had to sort of guess which word went into the sentence, and I had to do the process of elimination for one of them because the one sentence just didn't make any sense to me. But the kicker was the kids really can't read the directions for the worksheet. So there was one, I can't remember what they had to do. Oh, I know, they had to rewrite the nonsense sentence. Well, they couldn't read the directions. So they were just copying the words in the order in which they appeared. And I said to them, no, this isn't what you have to do. But what occurred to me was what we had taught them was it wasn't important that you had that right answer. It was important that you had an answer. All they really wanted to do was make sure there was a word on the line. Because I think somebody looked over their shoulder and said, oh, look, you did the worksheet. You get a check plus in the book. Not, oh, you actually did what you were supposed to do. And it was a real eye-opener for me. And it goes right back to that. I would go to that teacher and say, why? Your kids can't read, and this isn't teaching them to read. It's teaching them to fill in the blanks so they can say that they did their homework. I took out cards and wrote the individual words, and we played with making sentences out of them, but I only see them for, 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon. I can't fix that for them. And I'm trying not to be a troublemaker in my community, but I'm tempted to go to their teacher and just say, this isn't working. Yeah, right. This isn't working for these kids.
That's terrible instructional design, and how unfortunate for the kids in what they learned in that process and what wasted time and resources when we have so little of that to begin with. It's very sad to hear that something like that would happen.
It was a huge eye-opener for me.
Well, and I think we probably have stories like that all over the Commonwealth. And, you know, we have stories like that utilize paper, and we have stories like that utilize technology.
Yes, we do.
And
right. Yeah, I'm not going to say that it isn't right.
Yep, and I think that we have to look at what we really value and how we work towards that.
I think that's one of the reasons I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because oftentimes people say to me, I have a campaign, I am not the IT guy. People think, oh, you're an ITC, an instructional technology, so you can fix my hard drive. No! Teaching first. 5 college programs, teaching, 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 and teaching. That people need to view educational technologists in the Commonwealth of Virginia as experts in teaching first and foremost. Yes, technology is the melody with which we sing, but at the end of the day, the music is teaching. That's what we do. We are teachers of children, as Becky said right at the top of the hour. That's the focus. It's not on the tool, it's not on the technique, it's not on the website. I don't feel compelled to know every single device and every single tool and every single website. Yes, professionally speaking, I want to be informed. I do my best to be informed. My constituents from VSTE expect me to be informed. But we're responsible for being effective, highly effective teachers and teachers of teachers in teaching. It's all about the teaching, and I think that the more we can get into the mindset of being focused on teaching children and their learning, then the more often people are going to reflect upon us as teachers, as people they can come to have meaningful conversations about pedagogy, about learning, about classroom management, about instructional design, about child psychology, about assessment. You know, bang for your buck, it's tough to beat an educational technologist in this field, because we have our fingers in many, many pies. Hopefully pecan pies. It's going to be Thanksgiving soon.
So great, and Becky, I'm going to go ahead and give you the last word here, because Keith did his, and I thought that was great. Actually, sweet potato pie, Keith. I made one yesterday.
Fair enough.
So Becky, what have you got to end our thoughts with here? This has been a fabulous conversation.
Well, I think to piggyback on what Keith was saying, I think in addition to that, you know, talking about teaching kids versus teaching subjects, that we also need to switch that conversation in to I help kids learn, and really focus on the learning piece there. So I think it's time to take a step back and look at if a kid, if Virginia's standards of learning testing program defines what the state of Virginia thinks a quality education is, let's take a good hard look at that, and let's use all of our voices and all of our channels to redefine that, and let's make it a program that's worthy of our young people. These are the people that are going to be taking care of us when we can no longer take care of ourselves. So I really want to make sure these kids are equipped to critically think and be creative and be creative problem solvers, because I know in my old age I'm likely to create some creative problems. And I would love for the kids that are taking care of me to be equipped to do that. So I think that's what we have to shoot for.
All right, well, that's great. Yeah, I just tweeted out the last thought, and I think that's the piece of the language that we started with. Move from I teach kids to I help kids learn, and that's got to be the kind of big big picture change. So thank you very much, Becky and Keith, and thanks to the viewers that we did have for coming live. This obviously will be archived to the web. In fact, I believe the minute I click end broadcast, it is archived to the web, which is pretty darn cool. And so we are going to be continuing these conversations over time. We'd love to have folks join us both in the Hangout and live. Join our Google Plus community, and that'll be the place where we'll be announcing them. And of course, you're always encouraged to join VSTE. I believe it's Becky who says she'll pay for your membership.
Absolutely. I'll pay for anybody to join VSTE.
Because it is free, which is the best deal that you can get. So thanks, folks, for joining us. Thanks, Becky and Keith, for a great conversation, and we'll talk to everyone very soon.
Absolutely.